This video is about material selection strategy after the design has been completed. So in figure 3.6 of Ashby, what you can see is kind of a process diagram. You would use this process to select the materials. And as shown here, the first step would really be in translating the design requirements into things like functional requirements, constraints, objectives, and free variables for the design of the process, product, or service. Once you've done that, you would use a set of screening constraints in order to eliminate materials that won't work. Once you've done that, you'd rank the materials using some sort of metric, what we call objective, that would let you know which material would perform the best under the given criteria. And then they have on this process the last stop of seeking documentation. Figures 3.4 and 3.5 on page 35 of Ashby indicate how the process of selecting materials might work. So in figure 3.4 you see that you start with all the materials that are available, and you narrow the space of materials that you might choose for the design down to your final choice through a series of screening operations where you filter out materials that don't work. You go through an iterative process. You rank the materials in order of performance against your design constraints, and then you select the final material. In 3.5, you see this process illustrated in another way. It begins with the design requirements, as we had talked about. And those design requirements give rise to a series of constraints that might be reflected in the property, profile, or the required shape of the thing that you're making. Now, obviously, this refers to a product and not a service or a process. And then, if you're designing a product, once you have articulated those constraints, you go through this screening process to choose the material. And then this diagram shows that all of those imply particular cost structure and eco-impact for the final choice. And what I wanted to point out is that there's another way that this design process can be done. You could actually have the eco-impact as the most important criteria. That could be expressed up here under the requirements or the constraints. And that eco-impact could be the thing that is driving your material choice and the material process choice. So this is just one way that you could go through a material selection process in the design of a product.